For decades, some of the Catholic world's oldest pilgrimage roads seemed to be disappearing. Sanctuaries that once welcomed generations of pilgrims were suppressed, abandoned, damaged by war, or slowly forgotten as the crowds faded away. Some survived behind closed doors. Others were reduced to ruins. Their great age of pilgrimage appeared to be over. Then the pilgrims started coming back. Ancient routes are being walked again. Forgotten sanctuaries are being restored. Major Catholic gatherings are returning, and younger generations are rediscovering sacred places that nearly vanished from public memory. In some cases, the revival is happening where persecution once tried to erase Catholic life entirely. These are not simply historic churches receiving a facelift. They are 10 forgotten Catholic pilgrimage sites making a remarkable comeback. Subscribe to the channel as we uncover how places once pushed toward oblivion are becoming destinations of faith once again. Number 10. Velehrad, Czech Republic. 30,000 pilgrims descending on a village of barely more than 1,000 people would be remarkable anywhere. At Velehrad, it carries a deeper meaning. For decades, communist authorities tried to push Catholic faith out of public life. Yet, in this quiet corner of Moravia, a pilgrimage tradition connected to Saints Cyril and Methodius refused to disappear. The tension reached a breaking point in 1985. Thousands arrived for a major religious gathering, but the atmosphere quickly became more than devotional. Catholics openly resisted attempts to reduce the celebration to a controlled cultural event, and Velehrad became a rare place where public faith collided with political power. A pilgrimage site that could have faded into memory was suddenly revealing how much Catholic identity still survived beneath the surface. Then history turned. Only 5 years later, St. John Paul II came to Velehrad after the fall of communism. The same place that had witnessed pressure and resistance now welcomed a pope in public. But the real comeback was still ahead. Pilgrims began returning in greater visibility. Routes associated with Saints Cyril and Methodius expanded through the Czech lands and neighboring countries, bringing walkers back toward Velehrad step by step. Each July, the village changes completely as priests, families, young Catholics, and organized groups fill roads that once carried a much quieter form of faith. Around 30,000 people attended the national pilgrimage in 2024. Velehrad was never restored from ruins because its most important loss was not stone, it was public Catholic presence. That is what is returning. The basilica still stands where it always did, but the crowds around it tell a different story now. A pilgrimage tradition once forced toward the margins has stepped back into the open. Number 9. Shrine of Our Lady of Good Counsel, Shkodër, Albania. At the foot of Rozafa Castle in northern Albania stands a Catholic sanctuary that once seemed destined to disappear from history. The Shrine of Our Lady of Good Counsel had been deeply connected to local Catholic devotion, but communist rule changed everything. Albania eventually became one of the harshest environments for public religion in Europe, and during that period the shrine was destroyed as part of a wider campaign against religious life. For Catholics in the region, the loss was not only architectural. A place tied to prayer, pilgrimage, and Marian devotion had been removed from the landscape itself. The walls were gone, but the devotion did not disappear with them. After the fall of communism, Catholics returned to the site and began rebuilding what had been taken away. The recovery gained powerful momentum in 1993 when St. John Paul II visited Albania and blessed the cornerstone of the reconstructed sanctuary. That moment gave the restoration a meaning far beyond construction. A place once erased by state hostility was being publicly reclaimed as a Catholic place of worship. Over the following years, the shrine regained its role in the devotional life of Albanian Catholics. Marian celebrations returned, pilgrims gathered again, and the sanctuary became a visible sign that Catholic life in the country was no longer confined to memory. In 2024, the shrine reached another major milestone when it was elevated to the rank of minor basilica, giving new prominence to a site that had once been deliberately destroyed. Its comeback is powerful because the revival did not begin with tourism or architectural interest. It began with Catholics returning to a place where they had once been told their faith had no future. Prayer returned before prestige did. Pilgrims came back before the world paid attention. The sanctuary now stands not as a reconstruction of the past, but as evidence that a Catholic pilgrimage tradition, once pushed toward disappearance, can find life again. Number 8. St. Winefride's, Wales. For more than 8 centuries, pilgrims have descended toward the same cold spring in northern Wales, even through periods when Catholic pilgrimage itself came under pressure. St. Winefride's Well once stood among the great sacred destinations of medieval Britain, but as larger European shrines captured global attention, this ancient site gradually faded from the wider Catholic imagination. The remarkable part is that the pilgrimage never truly died. Its survival is woven into the landscape of Holywell. Medieval kings came here, ordinary believers followed, and generations continued to pray beside the water associated with St. Winefride. After the Reformation, devotion to saints and Catholic pilgrimage faced severe restrictions, yet people still found their way back. While many medieval shrines disappeared into history, Holywell held on to something far more difficult to preserve than stone. It kept the habit of pilgrimage alive. For centuries, that survival remained quiet. The well was deeply known by local Catholics and devoted visitors, but much of the international Catholic world barely noticed it. That silence is beginning to break. Organized pilgrimages are returning with renewed visibility, bringing processions, masses, prayers for the sick, and veneration of St. Winefride's relic back into the center of the experience. The national pilgrimage continues in 2026, drawing Catholics toward the well along a route their predecessors would immediately recognize. There is no need for massive architecture or overwhelming crowds here. The power comes from continuity. Pilgrims still descend toward the same water, still pray in the same sacred landscape, and still enter a tradition that survived long enough for a new generation to rediscover it. St. Winefride's Well is not coming back because it was rebuilt from ruins. It is coming back because people are finally paying attention again to a pilgrimage that quietly refused to disappear. Number 7. Mount Bokor, Catholic Church, Cambodia. High above the forests of southern Cambodia, an old Catholic church stands against the mist with walls still carrying the memory of war. Mount Bokor Catholic Church was built in the early 20th century, but its story was nearly buried by decades of violence, abandonment, and political upheaval. While many Catholic churches in Cambodia were destroyed during the Khmer Rouge era, this remote mountain church survived, although survival left it scarred, empty, and disconnected from the community it had once served. For years, Bokor looked more like a ruin than a place of pilgrimage. Its stone interior stood exposed to wind and rain, while traces of conflict remained visible around the building. The surrounding region had witnessed fighting between Khmer Rouge forces and Vietnamese troops, and the church became part of a landscape associated more with military occupation than prayer. Yet, the cross remained above the structure, creating an extraordinary contrast between a sacred building and the violence that had passed through it. The turning point came in 2017, when the Cambodian government officially returned the church and surrounding land to the Catholic community for religious use and restoration. That decision reopened a chapter many believed had already ended. Catholics began returning to pray at the site, including pilgrims from Cambodia and neighboring Vietnam, while restoration plans slowly moved forward. By 2026, efforts to revive the church had gained new momentum, with plans focused on bringing the sanctuary back into active Catholic life for its centenary. The comeback at Bokor is still unfolding, and that unfinished quality gives the site much of its power. Pilgrims are entering a church that has not yet been polished into a perfect monument. They encounter weathered stone, damaged surfaces, mountain fog, and the physical evidence of a history that could easily have erased the building altogether. Bokor is returning not because its wounds have disappeared, but because Catholics are praying inside those wounds again. A church once associated with abandonment and war is slowly becoming a sacred destination once more, and its restoration is transforming a surviving ruin into a living place of pilgrimage. Number 6. Shrine of Our Lady of Montligeon, France. A Catholic shrine devoted to praying for the dead is quietly becoming a place where the living are rediscovering hope. Deep in rural Normandy, the Shrine of Our Lady of Montligeon has carried a mission that feels almost uncomfortable in modern culture. Pilgrims come here to pray for the souls of the deceased, remember loved ones, and confront questions about death that many people would rather avoid. For years, that mission remained largely outside the attention given to the more famous pilgrimage centers of France. The change did not begin with spectacle. It began with people arriving in grief. Some came after losing a parent, a spouse, or a child. Others arrived carrying questions about faith that had grown sharper after death entered their lives. Shrine leaders have reported growing interest over roughly the past 2 decades, especially among young adults, returning Catholics, and people preparing to enter the church. Their reasons may differ, but they are drawn toward the same place because Montligeon refuses to treat death as something that should simply be hidden from view. That renewed attention is now reshaping the sanctuary itself. Organized pilgrimages bring groups to Montligeon for Mass and prayer, particularly during the annual Heaven pilgrimages in November, while visitors continue arriving throughout the year. At the same time, the basilica is undergoing a major restoration campaign involving its roof, stonework, and stained glass. The building is physically being repaired, while the spiritual mission inside it is finding a new audience. The contrast is difficult to miss. A shrine centered on prayer for the dead is receiving new life from people searching for hope, meaning, and a Catholic understanding of loss. Montligeon is not returning because it abandoned its ancient mission. It is returning because people are discovering that the questions at the heart of that mission never disappeared. Some pilgrims arrive carrying the name of someone they loved. Others arrive uncertain about faith itself. Yet both enter the same basilica, while its aging stones are being restored around them. That may be the most unexpected part of Montligeon's comeback. The sanctuary did not become relevant by changing what it was. A new generation simply began realizing that it still had something they needed. Number 5. National Shrine of Our Lady of Martyrs, Auriesville, New York. The road into Auriesville is still being walked. Pilgrims leave Lake George and move south through upstate New York, carrying prayers, fatigue, and the expectation of reaching a place tied to some of the earliest Catholic martyrs in North America. Their destination is the National Shrine of Our Lady of Martyrs, a sprawling sacred landscape associated with Saints Isaac Jogues, René Goupil, Jean de Lalande, and Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. The remarkable part is that this pilgrimage destination once faced a very uncertain future. Through the decades, the number of visitors rose and fell, but eventually declining attendance created financial pressure, while a shortage of priests made staffing increasingly difficult. The possibility of closing the shrine became real. A place that had once welcomed large Catholic pilgrimages risked becoming another historic religious site remembered more for its past than experienced through living devotion. Instead of disappearing, Auriesville entered a new chapter. A group of Catholics organized to preserve the shrine, and in 2017 ownership of the main campus was transferred to Friends of Our Lady of Martyrs Shrine. The revival that followed was not built around a single dramatic event. It grew through pilgrimages, volunteers, devotional programs, masses, and Catholics choosing to return to the grounds year after year. Then came a major sign that the shrine had regained national significance. In 2025, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops formally confirmed its status as a national shrine. Walking pilgrimages continue to approach Auriesville, including the Pilgrimage for Restoration, where participants travel on foot toward the shrine over several days. That movement gives Auriesville its strongest image. The comeback is not simply visible in paperwork or preservation projects. It can be seen in people physically moving toward a place that once faced the possibility of closing its doors. A pilgrimage site that nearly became a memory is once again becoming a destination, and every group arriving on foot adds another chapter to a story that almost ended too soon. Number 4. Paris to Chartres pilgrimage, France. The road to Chartres no longer looks forgotten. It looks crowded. Across the French countryside, thousands of Catholics move beneath banners and processional crosses, while priests walk beside families, students, and young adults who have chosen to spend 3 demanding days on foot. By the time the towers of Chartres Cathedral rise on the horizon, the pilgrimage has already become something larger than a journey to a historic church. It has become a public display of Catholic life moving through the landscape. Only a few decades ago, that sight would have been far less familiar. The modern Pentecost pilgrimage from Paris to Chartres was revived in the early 1980s by a relatively small group. What began quietly did not stay quiet. Year after year, more chapters formed, more families joined, and a growing number of young Catholics accepted the physical demands of walking roughly 60 miles while attending Mass, praying, singing, and receiving confession along the way. The scale now tells its own story. Participation rose sharply through the early 2000s 20 decade, reaching nearly 20,000 pilgrims from more than 20 countries by 2026. That growth matters because the people filling the route are not only older Catholics preserving a memory, many are young adults who are choosing a form of devotion that asks for effort, discipline, and public commitment. The most striking moments happen far from the cathedral. Exhausted pilgrims steady one another on the road. Priests hear confessions outdoors. Groups pray while rain or heat changes the rhythm of the march. For several days, a secular landscape becomes visibly Catholic simply because thousands of people keep moving through it together. The Paris to Chartres pilgrimage is returning through scale, sacrifice, and momentum. A tradition once revived by a small circle has become one of the most visible Catholic pilgrimages in France, and the generation now filling the road suggests that the movement is still growing rather than merely preserving the past. Number 3. National Shrine of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, Berdychiv, Ukraine. War changes the meaning of a pilgrimage. In Berdychiv, Catholics do not arrive only carrying rosaries, candles, and personal intentions. They come from communities living with air raid warnings, displacement, loss, and the exhaustion of a war that has stretched across years. Yet, in July of 2026, more than 3,000 people still gathered on the grounds of the National Shrine of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, turning a place of devotion into a visible act of endurance. Berdychiv had already survived another kind of pressure long before the current war. Under Soviet rule, Latin Rite Catholics across Ukraine endured severe restrictions, persecution of clergy, and the loss of many churches and institutions. By the late 1950s, only a small number of Latin Catholic priests remained active across the country. The church continued, but much of its public structure had been pushed into weakness and survival. That began to change in 1991, when St. John Paul II restored the Latin Catholic hierarchy in Ukraine. Churches reopened, communities rebuilt, and Berdychiv gradually reclaimed its place as one of the most important Marian destinations for Catholics in the country. The shrine was no longer simply preserving memory. Pilgrimage life was returning around it. Then war placed that recovery under pressure again. For several years, large outdoor celebrations at the shrine were no longer possible, and liturgies had to remain inside the church with far fewer people. That changed in July of 2026. Families, young people, elderly pilgrims, and people with disabilities filled the grounds while Archbishop Paul Richard Gallagher celebrated Mass as the special envoy of Pope Leo XIV for the 35th anniversary of the restoration of the Latin Catholic Church structures in Ukraine. Berdychiv has therefore experienced more than one comeback. It emerged from Soviet repression, rebuilt Catholic life after independence, and is now watching pilgrims return to its open grounds during war. The shrine has become a place where survival is no longer only remembered from history. It is being lived again by the people standing there in prayer. Number 2. Zarvanytsia, Ukraine. There was a time when Catholic faith in Ukraine had to survive quietly behind closed doors. Churches were closed, clergy were watched, and public devotion could carry serious consequences under Soviet rule. Zarvanytsia was caught inside that pressure, yet the Marian devotion connected to this place remained alive, even when the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church was forced underground. For years, the shrine could not function with the freedom it once had. The church around it was weakened, public pilgrimage was restricted, and much of Catholic life depended on families and small communities preserving faith in private. Zarvanytsia survived because people carried the memory of the place, even when they could not gather there as they had before. When the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church emerged from the underground, the transformation was dramatic. The pilgrimage center was revived, new structures were built, and Zarvanytsia gradually became one of the most important Marian destinations in Ukraine. The change was not simply architectural. A place once associated with hidden faith became a space where that same faith could finally be expressed in public again. The scale of the return is now impossible to miss. Around 25,000 pilgrims joined the nationwide pilgrimage in 2025, gathering before the miraculous icon of the Mother of God. In July of 2026, tens of thousands came again, many walking for several days before reaching the shrine. Their journey took place while Ukraine remained at war, adding another layer of meaning to every prayer for peace, protection, and endurance. Zarvanytsia now stands at the center of a Catholic community that once had to survive without public visibility. In 2026, the Synod of Bishops of the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church also gathered there, bringing bishops from Ukraine, Europe, the Americas, and Australia to the same place where earlier generations had struggled simply to preserve their faith. The most striking part of this comeback is the change in scale. What once had to be whispered is now prayed by tens of thousands. What once survived in hidden communities now fills roads with pilgrims walking toward the same Marian sanctuary. Zarvanytsia did not merely return after persecution, it returned large enough for the world to see it again. Number 1. Our Lady of Walsingham, England. For centuries, there was almost nothing left to return to. The medieval shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham had been destroyed, its famous image removed, and one of the great Catholic pilgrimage traditions of England was abruptly cut off. The road remained, the village remained, but the pilgrimage that had once drawn kings and ordinary believers seemed to belong to a world that would never come back. That rupture began in the 16th century. Walsingham had grown into one of the most important Marian destinations in medieval England, centered on a holy house associated with the home of the Virgin Mary at Nazareth. Pilgrims traveled across the country to reach it, and the shrine became so deeply rooted in English Catholic devotion that Walsingham was often called England's Nazareth. Then came the Reformation. In 1538, the priory was surrendered to royal commissioners. The image of Our Lady was taken away, and the original shrine was completely destroyed. Pilgrimage stopped. What generations had approached with prayer was reduced to memory, ruins, and stories preserved by people who could no longer worship there as their ancestors had. The extraordinary part came centuries later. Catholics began returning formally to Walsingham in 1897, eventually restoring the Slipper Chapel as the center of Catholic pilgrimage. In 1934, it became the National Catholic Shrine of Our Lady. A tradition that had been interrupted for hundreds of years had found a physical home again. But Walsingham's comeback is no longer only a historical achievement. The shrine is still expanding its pilgrimage life. In 2025, more than 3,500 pilgrims gathered for the Dowry of Mary pilgrimage, while another Tamil pilgrimage drew around 6,000 people. By 2026, the shrine reported more than 9,000 Tamil pilgrims at one gathering and 5,500 at the annual Syro-Malabar pilgrimage. These are not the numbers of a devotion fading quietly into heritage. They belong to a sanctuary, attracting different Catholic communities into the same sacred landscape. There is also something striking about the kind of Catholicism returning here. Diocesan groups, families, ethnic Catholic communities, young people, priests, and religious communities continue to arrive throughout the pilgrimage season. The shrine now maintains a full daily rhythm of Mass, the Rosary, Eucharistic adoration, benediction, and other devotions, giving Walsingham the character of a living spiritual center rather than a restored monument. That is why Walsingham belongs at number 1. Other pilgrimage sites survived persecution, war, neglect, or decline, but here the original shrine itself was destroyed and the pilgrimage tradition was broken for centuries. Yet Catholics eventually returned, rebuilt around the memory, and filled the road again. Walsingham did not simply recover from decline, it crossed a gap of centuries and became a pilgrimage destination again. A place once erased from Catholic England has returned strongly enough that thousands now gather where history once seemed to have delivered the final word. These 10 pilgrimage sites tell a story larger than the buildings themselves. Some survived persecution, others endured war, abandonment, or centuries of silence, yet the roads leading to them are filling again. Pilgrims are returning, sanctuaries are being restored, and traditions once pushed toward the edge of memory are finding new life in a changing Catholic world. Perhaps that is the lasting power of pilgrimage. A sacred place can fall silent for generations, but as long as faith survives in memory, prayer, and the people willing to make the journey, the road is never completely lost. If you enjoy discovering the forgotten places, history, and living traditions of the Catholic Church, subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue uncovering the stories that deserve to be remembered.